We're on.
Hey, man, long time no see.
I know
You
it's
go to
been a while.
Mexico, I go to Scandinavia, you go to Mexico,
Yeah,
both
we
different
talk about this
continents.
brand new website just to abandon it for a few weeks and then we come back. So it's always good.
Of course, of course.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but you have been busy. So you were at React Conf Miami at the end of April.
Yep. Yeah, the last couple months have been this rapid fire. That, then I did a product group, discovery group with a bunch of folks in our company here in Florida, and then I went to Scandinavia for work, and then it's just been crazy. But the React Conf was awesome. 2 days. First time we've done it in Miami. And Michelle Bakels did a great job organizing it. It was awesome.
That's great. So what was your talk about? Because you were a speaker
Uh,
there.
yeah, and we can go over that today. So I don't remember the original title, but I should have changed it because really the what I changed the title to was performance, user experience, and sustainability. It was the original title was some really long drawn out thing. I kind of wish I would have rethought that. You know how it is, like when you submit, there's a call to paper, and then you submit it, and you're like, oh, this is what I think I'm going to talk on, and you quickly come up with a title. And but anyway, it performance, user experience, and then specifically fisheries sustainability, kind of tying in all of my worlds into one.
I think if you keep the name that you use for submitting the talk, it means that you didn't really prepare that well. Like you fill your presentation with whatever name you gave, but if you actually spend the time, you get a different title, and then it doesn't add up. But it's always fun.
No, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, that's a good point because what you should be doing is put yourself in the shoes or the seat of the people that are going to be listening, and you kind of think about the other sessions they're going to be listening to, and how do you keep their attention and what's relevant to them, and make sure you don't overlap. So yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, the name almost never applies. At least not the original name. You will have to come up something after you spend time building that presentation. So, okay, that's cool. Let's do that today. I mean, let's focus on that. That's good content. It's relevant to what we do on Friction Log, and I think it encompasses things that your expertise has gotten you to that point. So let's dig into it.
Okay. And I can go ahead and share my screen for the slides. The folks listening on the podcast won't be able to see it, but we'll talk through it. And they're actually hand drawn slides anyway. I actually drew every slide with an Apple Pencil on my iPad just to be completely different and random. It was actually kind of fun. So I think I'm going to like start doing it now, just like that. Very different style.
That's
And I'm a terrible artist. So it's like, you know, I look like I'm a 2 year old drawing this stuff, but yeah, it works. Whatever.
I mean, for the podcast listeners, they will be missing a lot, so it's kind of cool. I think that's the first time that I heard somebody actually using the pencil for something enterprisey, other than just the scrolling. So, or not enterprisey, but just work wise, or something like that. So, other than the videos from Apple where they have all these awesome drawings, but good,
Yeah, of
looks
course.
good, man.
Yeah. So here's how I think we should do this, SR. So I think we'll just go through it. I won't do the lecture talk like did it. You can go to the React Conf YouTube and watch the actual talk. But what we'll do is I can go through the slides, and then we can just have a conversation on like I'll hit the highlights, and then we can just kind of talk about what's important, what's not important, and all that kind of stuff.
Sounds good.
And the point that I make in this first slide, which for the people listening is just a really lame drawing of Florida with a bunch of like concepts like engineering, fish, metric, users. Um, the point I made right off the get go is really the one thing I want everybody to walk away from, because every talk I think should have one thing that people walk away from, not 10 things, not 3 things, but one thing. Um, the one thing is, in all the hustle and bustle, everything that we do for work, don't forget why you do the work, and then specifically who you're doing it for. That's really what I wanted to make the point. And this talks about performance metrics and code and stuff, but um, tying it to that always, no matter what you're doing. And that's kind of how I did the intro, was that, and then plus just looking at my beautiful third grade drawings.
It's good,
uh,
man.
yeah.
Black and white, black. That makes sense.
Right. Um, and then we don't need to go through this, but the obligatory like CV page of here's all my handles and all this. So I just tried to make it kind of interesting. Again, with the silly watermarks and stuff. um, yeah.
Cool.
But
React Native
then
before it was cool. Okay. I
what?
like the Observator one. React Native before it was cool.
Yeah, because the Accelerator it was literally what React Native is before React Native and before React, I think, actually, right?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So this slide is when we actually get into it, and these are things that you typically hear, um, and we prioritize in our we improved our page speed by 20%. We reduced our time to um, whatever, fill in your lighthouse score metric by an order of magnitude because we switched to Next.js, or our DNS lookup speed was bad and we improved it. We tweaked the point and polygon algorithm and it's 10 times faster. Actually, I said that at one point. Um, so there's always things that we say um, like that. It's very common, and as engineers, we prioritize this stuff. This is how we measure things. This is how we measure success. And all that's super, super important. But the point that I made here is that um, it is kind of insider baseball. And what I mean by that is it's like our own language. It's our own uh, internal engineering speak. And sometimes what happens is when we get wrapped around that, we forget why we're doing it. Um, so as an example, when I show this slide, the Lighthouse score, and you see the Lighthouse score, and I can say, hey, we improved our page by 20%, our speed, or whatever it is, accessibility, SEO, whatever. Most front end engineers get it. Like they know the Lighthouse picture, they know these radial dials, they know what those metrics mean. We get it. But that it's specific to us. It's not to the user, and obviously we all know that. But what if this is the kind of funny part of the talk? What if we switched it around and we framed it differently? It's the same things, but then we reframed it this way, where we same quotes. Our DNS lookup speed was bad. We improved it, but I put an end user with a fish there. Well, he doesn't care about that, right?
Yep. I don't think
or
so.
yeah, or here's a Ukrainian allegedly using uh what's the satellite thing that Elon Musk runs? I'm drawing a blank.
Starlink.
Starlink, using Starlink to communicate with something, which end up communicating with a drone on the field. We improved our page speed by 20%, or whatever. First time to contentful paint, or whatever those metrics are. Or here's a picture of what is that? A red grouper. We improved our caching performance by using Gob for Go instead of JSON. Obviously, the fish doesn't care. So that's just a fun, silly, stupid example that when we frame the conversation a little differently, not by Lighthouse, by the end user, it helps us stay focused. So where engineering perspective, we're so used to talking insider baseball, we sometimes forget actual value. What is the value that it's bringing to the user? And I can say we increased the page speed by 20%, and we assume that that makes that brings value to the user, because it does. But we don't keep it front of mind. It's still just our metrics, our insider baseball, our world. And I think when we say things like well, it makes them happy, or they won't leave as fast, or we'll sell more products that way, or whatever it is. That's true, but I also think it's kind of generic. Or the worst one, even though it's true, is, well, we're just doing this to make the Google bots happy, which is true actually. A lot of times
Yeah.
we're coding things to a metric to make a machine happy. Um, but this Cesar was the part of the speech that was like, the let me just frame where I'm going, like, by just throwing out silly examples of, this is how we talk, and here's the users over here, and they're not really the same thing. What we do might overlap or help them, but we don't keep them in the forefront. Does that make sense, like where I was going with that?
It does, and it brings us back to what the users feel, right? That they like,
Mhm.
if you talk to somebody that is non-technical, they will say it feels slow. It feels like it's, I don't know, some complicated. They don't have metrics. They don't have protocols or data formats or things like that, and they just feel things. And everybody feels that Facebook is slower these days because so many ads or stuff like that. And that's as far as they can go. And as engineers, we don't really compute that. We don't, pun intended, I guess.
Yeah.
We just we're like, what do you mean by feel? And I'm like, well, I don't know what's wrong. It just feels like it's slow. I don't know if it's my machine or my internet connection or it's Facebook, and that's it. So yeah,
Right.
I get it.
Yeah, like an analogy to that is, so I play guitar, judging from the guitars behind me, and so one of the we were playing a guitar quartet at one of the colleges down south here in South Florida, and the performance teacher, we were playing Eine kleine Nachtmusik, the dun 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 dun. So and the performance teacher, he was telling us, he said, "Look, the people in the audience, they're not going to be sophisticated enough to say that was good, but the cello part of that guitar was off a little bit, or the timing was off, or the intonation was wrong because blah 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 blah, and that's because his technique was wrong because his elbow was in the wrong spot, blah blah blah." It's like they're not technical enough to say that or to point that out, but they'll walk away and go, "It was okay," or "I guess it was okay." Um, and that's when you've lost.
Yeah.
You know, that's not
Absolutely.
good. That's not good. So anyway, that this is like to frame it, and then I went right into this slide, which this is the slide you see from Vercel all the time, which is the iceberg of the web. Which I love this picture because it's like everybody sees this little tiny thing, kind of back to that analogy with performance and music. But then the under part of the iceberg is the third party scripts and internalization and layout shift and imaging and caching and all this crazy network stuff. All these things you have to worry about just to make the page right for the user. Um, and so the point of this slide was to kind of talk about why we as engineers are so focused on these metrics. And sometimes we forget about the user because we're trying to make the bots happy, or we're chasing a metric, which we know is good for the user, but we don't know exactly the impact to the user. We just know, hey, this is 20% better, whatever better means. So this was like the why. Why do we do that? And so the points I made were, the first one was, platforms like Google, like Vercel, um, they have to talk about things in abstract terms, irreducible minimums, because they deal in value abstraction. So they can't articulate and measure the value for every end user because they're not their end user. Like in my case, my end user is an angler, right? It's a fisherman. Well, they're not
Hmm.
going to like base lighthouse skill value or lighthouse performance metrics, the value of them to an angler. They're not, that's not their business. So they abstract it. Um, and so um, they're so good at educating us and building tools like the Lighthouse tool, to help us with those metrics, that we just gravitate to talk the way they want us to talk because that's how they talk. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, um, we're not accustomed to talking about these things in other terms other than the ones we've been taught. So Google teaches us about Lighthouse. Vercel builds it into their products like Next.js and stuff. So we're just used to talking that way, but it's hard to talk about it in other terms that our users care about. And I think one of the reasons why it's harder to talk that way is because it's harder to measure. Like, how do I measure that this performance thing was better for an angler on the water? And it's a lot harder. Like, one
Yep.
of our goals is to make sure they return their fish fast. Your fish you pull it out of the water, it's suffocating. You have so much time to figure out if you can keep it or not, based on regulations. So that the apps have to run fast for them to do that. So that's a lot harder to manage or to measure than hitting a button in Google Chrome to get your lighthouse score.
It's not like your Google Analytics is gonna say, "Hey, this angler killed 3 fish because he didn't know he had to throw it out back."
Right, or
So it's
because it took too long to load, and so yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. And
it can be tricky.
yeah, and the last point I'll make on this slide was we don't talk to users as much as we should. And the more you talk to users, the easier it is to quantify and qualify these performance metrics, and tie them to the impact that it's making to them, not just what Chrome says or whatever.
And we always think, or not always, but most of the time, that we know better. We know what the users want or need, and that's why we don't need to talk to them, because they're gonna suggest that we put confirm buttons everywhere, because that's how Windows does it. And because
Right.
we just assume a lot of things, never get to that opportunity of, hey, let's talk to this user, let's remove that, but still have those conversations with them. I get it. I mean, it happens.
Yeah. 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 It does happen. And it's a conscious habit that you have to build to talk to them. And what I tell people all the time, if you hang around me long enough in product world, I tell people all the time, the people in an organization, in a company that have influence, that have power, um, are the ones who talk to the users, who talk with the user's voice. If you talk with the user's voice, um, you have influence, and there's obvious reasons for that. But one of them being it's just hard to do, and so there's not that many people that do it in a company. Hey, Cesar, you dropped
I'm
out. Are you
back.
back? Okay.
I'm back.
All right.
We're
Good.
having technical difficulties. I see the little signal thing coming up and down, but hopefully we can keep going. I heard you.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. Next slide. So, this was just a slide on like fish rules. Now it's in part of FishBrain. Now our regulation data is in part of FishBrain. We've talked about some of this on a podcast. So we don't need to go over this stuff. But then I got back to this. So the main point again, what does all that mumbo jumbo actually do for, in our case, the angler, the fisherman, or even for the fish for that matter? Does it help me convert a user to a subscription? Is that really what it's for? Or does it help me sell an e-commerce product better? Yeah, it does. But again, it's deeper than that. Don't just think about it in terms of how the platforms tell you to think about it. Like, transform what you're doing and think about it from your user's perspective. And my favorite story here, um, in this, like if you look at these quotes, like now I'm framing it to faster performance is 20% faster, but why? Because it saves fish. Or why, when we did this polygon optimization, why is it helpful? Because it helps anglers fish legally. Or a quicker response time helps protected or endangered species. Like, now I'm tying it back to actually the real value to the user. So
Yep.
a good example of this is, so Aubrey and I were fishing. Actually, I brought my laptop on his boat. We're fishing in the Atlantic Ocean. I've got a phone plugged in. I've got Xcode open, and we're testing out the app going in and out of different regulation boundary zones in the ocean. because it's a bad signal to no signal, and it's an offline app, but still goes off and on and all that stuff. And so we have to test it. And at one point, he caught this big cobia, beautiful cobia. Could have fed all of our families for a couple days, and the app took a little too long to load the regulation for cobia, so he threw it back in the water, and we knew it was legal. We knew what the regulation was, but because the app didn't tell him what the regulation was fast enough, he threw it back and said the app needs to work faster.
We're not eating today because
Exactly.
you're a bad developer, Ray.
Yep, pretty much. That's exactly right.
That's a
Oh,
good way
man.
to motivate developers. Like, you don't eat.
Yeah, right. That's hardcore, man.
Yeah. It's so funny.
But I love to tell that story because it ties both of our worlds, the user and the product world, and what really why we're doing what we're doing with the code and everything, which is like the fun part that I like as a hobby and as a craft and as a job. And it ties it together. Like at some point, they have to meet in order to make a difference, to make an impact. It's very important.
And it's why it's important. I mean, I get it. You gotta work and you work in technology, and technology applies to everything. But there are definitely preferences that people have, right? Whether that's fishing or healthcare or
Right.
retail or marketing, whatever you want. Like, it doesn't have to be your passion. I'm definitely against like following your passion for work and stuff like that. It's also good to have hobbies for your passions,
Right.
but at least don't hate on what you work on. Like, if you don't like I don't know, if you don't like healthcare because I don't know, we think that the system is broken in the US, don't, like, unless you're going to try to fix it and you're going to be in a small company, but don't go and work for one of the big companies that you're just going to be miserable working there, right? Like,
Right.
it doesn't have to be your day-to-day motivation, but you also don't have to hate it and just work there because it pays well.
Right.
So I feel that when you are talking about visuals, it's something that you enjoy to do. It's not your primary passion or anything like that, but it's something that you care about, and that also puts you closer to the users more than the metrics, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. 100%. And this kind of thinking, I think, can go to any business, anything that you're doing, even developer experience. You hear a lot about developer experience and, oh, linear is awesome. The experience is so much better than Jira, or, fill in the blank of Supabase is amazing. It's so much better than Firebase, blah, 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 blah. And all of those, everybody says it's because of the developer experience. And they're not wrong. But you can actually tie it back to the user too. So we a lot of times we attach developer experience to languages, right? So there's everybody goes, oh, Rust is so much better than C++. I mean, is it? Is it really? Because all these people are developing in C++, but then you find out why, and it's like, oh, it's an experience thing. That's why. Python is so much better for data science. But then you drill into why, and it's like, oh, it's because of the libraries that are available, like
The
Pandas and
ecosystem. Yeah.
NumPy and PyTorch, and right. It's like it's not really Python. It's the other things, the ecosystem, which equates to developer experience. And so like the one example of this is the language mumps. Have you heard of the language mumps?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it's a terrible name for a language. So it was invented in like the late 60s, but the VA hospital uses it. So the federal hospital for all of the veterans, they use that as the primary language since its conception, I guess. But there's a lot of limitations to that language. And like I don't remember, don't quote me on it, but it's something like variable names can only be 8 characters or 9 characters long. Um,
Okay.
that's the first thing. And the problem is the VA hospital, their frameworks or whatever, this is what I've been told. The first 2 characters are all namespaced with VA or whatever their designation is. So you've already like cut it from 8 to
So it's kind
6.
of like following the nomenclature from Objective C, where you will do NS and you will do the first two letters from like talk about
Right.
the author, right? Next step,
Yeah.
or UI kit or things like that. But then they're also limited with 8 characters, so technically it's only 6.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's something like to that effect. And there's all these other issues and limitations with the language. And I had read somewhere that they did this study on, because obviously this is a federal thing, right? So they're always trying to get funding to rewrite it or to update it. And one of the studies was because of the limits of the language, not bugs in the code, not server issues, not all the typical things that cause problems.
Hmm.
Because of the limitations of the language, like 1 or 2 people die a year in the VA hospital because of it. So in that case, you could tie developer experience to it saves lives.
Yeah.
um, so it's like that kind of mindset is what I'm a big part of this talk I was trying to get through is what are you doing? It doesn't matter what you think is the most mundane, boring thing, tweaking your build system to get your build system to work because everybody knows how much of a pain and soul sucking that is. Um, like if you can tie that back to your business goals or your users and stuff like that, it gives you much more purpose and better focus too.
Absolutely. Okay, makes sense. I mean, so far you're above water. I'll be awake during your talk.
Well, I think I might have been done by my talk by now. So there's we're definitely talking through this a little slower, but that's because we get to do the colored commentary. So then this slide, I go a layer deeper. So what about okay, that's the user, but now what about the company? Deeper than the user side, what about us as engineers, product, business folks? The engineer goes, we have to do this because we need X or we need to use Y, whatever it is, the latest, greatest framework or library. And that's how we're going to get better performance. And then on the other side, the business, the product people, they don't understand it. And so they walk away going, oh, here we go again. The developers wanting to use their latest, greatest, coolest thing, and they can't tie what you're saying to what they care about, which are business metrics. In case of product, they're talking to users all the time, so they can't tie it to the users not saying that they wish you would use library 3000 super awesome npm package whatever. The user didn't say that, so what so they don't get it when engineers talk about that a lot of time.
I'm gonna try to describe this slide for the people that are not looking at it. It's basically 3 actors, right? Engineering or development, the product people or the business people, and the users. And you have the same need, which is basically in our lingo is a performance need. And how you frame it matters, because if we just frame it with we need it to be faster or we need to increase 20%, then the product and business is in between engineering and the users, and it wouldn't go through. They will go back and say, we don't get it. Users are not asking for this. They don't care what version of TypeScript you're using, right? But if
Right.
you frame it in, hey, the user needs this, um, which is, hey, the user need to see the regulations faster in the context of fish rules, then the product and the business people will get it, and the user will get it at the end, because that's technically how it gets communicated. And it goes all the way to release notes. Have you seen release notes lately? Some of them are so obscure that you can tell that engineering is writing them and not the product people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the the apps that update every 2 weeks and say, hey, we made the small tweaks and performance improvements that you
Right.
wouldn't notice, right? But in general, most of the release notes are just like, hey, we fixed some bugs. Okay, cool. Like, doesn't change anything for the user. When you have product people writing those, then you see things like, hey, we thought I don't know, we thought this fish was not supposed to be caught, but it is. So we just made it better for you. Like that, it's something that the users understand, and that makes the experience better, and say, hey, these guys are working for me, right? They're working for my experience,
Right.
and therefore I can be a customer, a subscriber, or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. As soon as you change, it can be literally the same thing you want to do as an engineer. You need to implement something, tweak something, and you just need some time to do it to make the performance better. But if you frame it with the impact to the user, it's much more likely to be accepted and understood, than if you get super technical and about it. It
Yeah.
doesn't benefit a lot of people if you just get uber technical about that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then this slide is kind of like how do we speak with the voice of the user, since that's what we want to do, so we can impact the organization, we can impact the users, we can get done the things we need to get done. Um, how do we how do we speak with the voice of the user? Well, the best way is to actually talk to them. And if you can't talk to them, because that's valid in some organizations and some companies, that you're not the one that's able to talk to them, then find somebody that is talking to them and get really close to them. And if you can't do that for whatever reason, um, you can still find them online. If your users or your personas are a certain type of people, you can go research them online. I would, in every bit of energy I had, I would try to talk to users as much as possible. And if I couldn't do that, I'd go read about them, watch some YouTube videos about them, whatever. There's going to be, I guarantee there's YouTube videos of your users talking about what they care about. um,
I About everything, right? If you
yeah,
just ask, it's funny how we Google things like, "Hey, I need to fix this," and you're learning a new language, and you're struggling with Python or something, and you go straight to Google. But if it's like, "Hey, we need to understand the users, or we need to get to know the users," I know developers that they don't like to see one-star reviews in their apps, and I get it. Like some of them are harsh, but that's a user that took the time to give you one
yeah,
star.
that's
So
right.
reply to them, and try to understand what's going on. And as you said, maybe product is the one talking to them, or users. But if you want, you can find information about anything. That's why we have the internet.
Yep, yep. And I got to say, to your point about that, that's a great example of, um, the people that give you 1 star are much more likely to give you 5 star if you interact with them. That's
Than
just
the
like,
ones that,
yeah, who don't do anything.
yeah.
It's much more likely to happen. Yeah, talk to your users for sure. And then, yeah, at the bottom of the slide, you'll see like our typical world, which some of the stuff we already talked about. You got your millisecond latency, your 60 frames a second goals, memory limit goals. There's even UX laws, even the Daughtery threshold. We've talked about that on this
Yeah.
podcast, or Fitts law, Hicks law. All those things are mumbo jumbo, right? That's insider baseball things that we care about. They're important. Um, but if I told the user, hey, because of the Daughtery threshold, we we spent 3 weeks fixing this, they'd be like, okay, can I keep this fish or not? Like, who cares? Um, so, again, the point is, keep the user in mind, talk to them, and talk with their voice. So much
So
more powerful.
do you think it's also, I mean, we all have seen and or heard the famous Steve Jobs words that the users don't know what they want until they see it. Do you think that that particular statement has had ripple effects in the developer community to think that we know better than them? And I'm like, I get it when you're talking about technology and new products, and when the iPhone became the iPhone, yeah, they didn't know there was something better, right? So it applies to some things like hardware development or product development or things like that. But
Right.
I feel like that thing stay, and everybody tries to apply and like, oh, my users don't know anything. Steve Jobs said so. So
And that would
I
be a
should.
total misunderstanding of that quote too, because I totally agree with Steve Jobs on that. Like you listen to Steve. I mean, Henry Ford's famous quote too about, if I would have listened to users, I would have built a faster horse. That
Mhm.
everybody quotes that, but um, that's 100% right. But misunderstanding that, I think you're right, is like, oh, I know better, and it's like you would only know better if you were actually talking to them and understanding their problems and their needs. You don't talk to users to build exactly what they say to build. That's not why you're talking to them. You talk to them for their pains, their gains, what they aspire to be or to do, what they don't even know about, but man, will make a big difference in their life. Um, that like you don't know that unless you're talking to them. Um,
Yeah, which
and,
goes back to my point of a user will ask you to have confirm messages because once
right,
every 10 times they don't want to delete something and they by mistake do it, and because there is no confirmation, that's what the solution for the user is.
right,
And they will tell you that, where the actual pain point is, hey, I sometimes make the mistake of deleting something that I don't want to, and maybe the solution is make an easy undo action, right?
right,
Not precisely confirm, because 9 out of 10 times you want them to delete fast, but that one time where it's a mistake, you wanna remediate that pain, right? So that's the most basic example of what you're just saying.
right,
um
right.
cool.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And to go to this next slide, because that's going to segue into this. So there's traps in some of these performance metrics and measuring these metrics and stuff that we have to be careful of. Measurability bias, that's the tendency to prefer options simply because they can easily be measured. That's one. Um, and then there's another one called metric fixation, and that's focusing on a specific metric at the detriment of others. And even back down to the product stuff that we're talking about now, just a second ago, a lot of times people will focus on their specific product goals or their business goals or key results or objectives or whatever they have. And they forget that actually the user doesn't really care if your retention is better by 2%. Like like you can make some crazy hacks to improve your retention by 2%, but that doesn't mean it's actually better for the user. And so someone who's has metric fixation will say, well, no, if we improve the retention, then that's better for the clearly it's better for the user. It's like, no, I could right now say, hey, anybody who opens up the app every day for the next month, I'll give you $100. I can improve retention. That doesn't mean that's good. So that's what's called metric fixation. When you fixate on one metric or one thing, whether it's performance metric, whether it's a business metric, whatever it is, engineering metric. Um, and so those are traps, especially with the stuff, even the Lighthouse score, which is really good. Like the stuff that Google's promoting is really, really good for users. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you fixate on that, and again, don't consider the user, then you might make the wrong decisions, actually. Um,
Yeah, because you
just for
want to load faster your web page to make your Lighthouse score better. You don't include all the information that the user needs, and you hide some things, and that that doesn't improve the experience. It improves the score. Your user is not going to be happy.
yeah, yeah. And there's a great quote from the book Tyranny of Metrics, which I think maybe they coined metric fixation. I don't know, but it's in there a lot. Um, and he's talking about metric fixation, and he says it occurs because not everything that is important is measured, and much that is measurable is unimportant. And so what happens is, back to measurability bias. It's like, oh, this is easy to measure, so we're just going to report on this. Well, it doesn't mean it's good. It's
Yeah,
just
it's a
easy
like
to,
it's an excellent book. We'll put the link in the show notes.
yeah,
Good.
yeah. I love it. I love that book. And so the conclusion was kind of like, just tie all these things. You have users, you have yourself responsible for tying this back. And by the way, when I say yourself, I mean it doesn't matter if you're an engineer, you're a QA engineer, you're a product person, you're a business person. Everybody has a responsibility to tie what they're doing back to the user.
Yeah.
And whatever they're doing, if you're in engineering, you're responsible to draw that dotted line over whatever you're doing to the user. Um, and you have to find the value. Like I can't emphasize that enough. Like the point I made, I think in the talk was something like, you can spend 2 weeks and at the end of it, you can say, I spent the last sprint and I made our site 200 milliseconds faster. And some people will be really excited about that. And some people will be like, what am I doing with my life? That's all I did was I just made the site 200 milliseconds faster. And if you lose sight of the user, that's easy to do. So, you can say we got a 1 second query speed improvement through this data pipeline over the last quarter. But it means what to whom, right? So you just impacted somebody's life. You just help protect an endangered species, or you just help, whatever it is, tie what you did to that, talk about it that way, think about it that way. And my goodness, you get so much more fulfillment out of your job, I think, if you do it that way.
I agree. That's a great conclusion. I like how you put there the conclusion. Like I want you to take one thing out of this, and it's that everything is tied and everything is interconnected. And if not, then either you're gonna build the wrong thing or you're gonna be unhappy. So I think that's a good one. So how many
Right.
people were in React Conf then?
Oh man, there was a lot. I don't know. Don't quote me on it, but close to 500 maybe.
Hmm,
I don't
cool.
know. I'm not quite sure. But there was enough people there to. It was great. First time in Miami doing a React conference, and it was fantastic.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. I think it was a good topic, not your typical topic that you would expect in a very technical conference. And I think it has a good idea. And if just like you were saying, when you build a product, you think about the user, and if you hear somebody talking about fish rolls or fish brain, it makes you very happy. I think also if you get one developer or one product owner to bring those ideas back to whatever they're building and it's better, I think that's a success. So congratulations. It's always good. Next time you should invite me and pay for my tickets to go and visit you.
Okay, I'll do that. And you can just stay with me. We'll take the Bright Line, the train down to Miami. Yeah, that works.
And maybe we'll do a live show, or at least live both at the same time zone. That would be fun.
Yeah, that would be fun. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Thanks. See you next time, everybody. It's good to be back. We have more to come, so we'll keep you posted.
Thanks,
Thanks, Ray.
Cesar. Yep. See you.